So hello and welcome everyone to Document Automation Bootcamp Family Law Edition. As some of you may know, we've broken this bootcamp series up into 3 different parts. A couple of weeks ago, we did an estate planning specific edition. Last week, we did a probate specific edition. And today we're focusing specifically on family law. And if you've come to a previous session, this one's going to feel a little bit different. We're going to have completely family law examples, and we're also going to be interacting with CSV files and a couple of other things that we haven't done before. So I hope you'll be able to draw something new out of this session today. My name is Brittany Hernandez, and I am a lawyer based in California and licensed here. I practiced intellectual property and entertainment law before becoming the head of legal innovation here at Gavel. I just got really interested in how we can use legal technology to advance the way that we serve and reach clients. So I'm really excited today to share some of the things that I have learned along the way with all of you. This is a fully 2-hour session. So if you have to leave after the first hour, we are recording this. So you will be able to get this recording at the end. So don't worry if you feel like you're going to miss something, I will send that to you. But for those of you that want to stay with me for the full 2 hours, I'm excited for it. Let's do it. So we're going to break this time up into a couple of different sections. We're going to go through old versus new processes. We're going to go over how to use automated forms for family lawyers. And then we're going to go into how to automate your own templates, be they standard templates and forms that everybody has to use, or if they're your own custom templates, PDFs, and Word documents that you have created for your own practice over the many years that you've been practicing. And then I'm just going to go into if a lot of that, when we get to that section, feels a little bit overwhelming, if you feel like you need a little bit of help, how you can get in touch with an expert. But what we try to do at Gavel is to create a product or a tool that allows you to pick it up without having any coding background or experience. And then we are always here to support you with any questions. But if you do want some help, we do have some Gavel experts that can help you as well. So let's first start with this idea or kind of contrast between old processes versus new processes. And I know that some of you on the call are already Gavel customers or power users or whatever else, but for those of you that are kind of new to this concept of automation, we're going to just quickly go over this and then we'll break it down into how to actually use Gavel as an automation tool. I want to also remind you that my colleague Maddie is here in the chat if you have any questions, and you can just ask them as you think of them, and then we can pick them up, and I'll kind of pick them up at different junctures as well. So when we think about this old process or old way of doing things, don't feel bad if you're doing this right now, what I'm going to show you, because I did this when I first started practicing law, and I didn't know that there was another way to do anything. So you also pick up habits from wherever you have worked before, where, let's say in a different office, this was always the way things were done. So it's hard to kind of break out of that mental model of this is how we do this thing. And I just want to show you and clue you into a new way of working that doesn't waste time on repeated manual data entry. So let's look at an example of that. For example, when you practice family law in California, obviously there are many, many standard forms that you must use or fill out. And they have a lot of different sections, both within the document itself and across multiple documents that repeat. So that means they ask you for the same information over and over and over again. And if you don't have an automation process, it can be very time consuming to write in the petitioner's name here and the respondent's name here, and then also down here, and also everywhere across this document itself that has that repeating information. And then from there, we have to go over to the next document and put in the petitioner's name here and here again. And all of this other information that will repeat about you as the attorney, about the court. And you're just constantly filling this information out across the document and across multiple documents over and over again. So that's that idea of, but anything that is repeated can be automated. And what we mean by that is we can take all of those things that repeat and consolidate them into a single question that we ask, and then add any logic that we need to. So for example, we have logic, for example, about whether this is the petitioner's or the respondent's schedule of assets and debt. we can program in or, use Gavel to add conditions that will show or hide a check mark in each of these boxes, depending on our selection in the questionnaire that we're going to create. So you can kind of see throughout all of these different documents that you have to fill out that all of this information repeats over and over again. So instead of manually going through and typing in our name every single time through all of these different documents, what we can do instead is we can use a Gavel workflow to complete this information. So I'm going to show you a short version of this. There are two different versions of the one I'm going to show you. One is the one I'm going to show you right now is a petition for divorce, where it's a short version, which means we're not going to ask every single question that's possible in all of these documents, but we are going to ask all of the questions that repeat across all of the documents that are the same. Things like the attorney's name, the court information, and things like that, and some of the other pieces like children's names and so on. So there's a long version of this where it does ask every single piece of information, including all of the assets and the debts and all of the different expenses and all of the different pieces that you must fill out there. But just to show you a quicker example of what this could look like, I'm going to show you what that is. So the process of this getting filled out can either be from your perspective as the attorney, or you can assign a workflow to a client who will be given an email that says, hey, you've been assigned something to fill out by your attorney. Please fill this information out. And as they fill that information out, it gets stored in their client portal where they can review and refer back to and reuse the information that they enter, so that they're never entering information twice that they've already given us. And simultaneously, we are getting a copy, you could say, of all of the information entered on our end that we can also reuse. Now, I know that some people are more visual learners and some are more sort of like kinesthetic learners. So we're going to try to engage all of these different things today. Just a quick note that we have a message in the chat that says, for those of us familiar with Gavel, we found the questions were extraordinarily dense, particularly for the FL150. The questions were so dense that it took less time to use ClearDraft to prepare them. Yeah, so that's a really good point. So for the structure of this workflow, that's a really good point. So I went through and I got to go through and kind of see how this was built and see like how I would maybe with my own knowledge and the way that I like to work a little bit differently or prepare this differently. And that's going to come up in that point around like using automated form versus like creating your own or adapting the ones that we've built so that they work better with the way that you like to work or streamlines the information in some way. So this is just a starting point that you can use. You can either use it to prepare all of the documents, or you can kind of see this as that example of how to structure something or how something might be able to populate multiple documents across multiple pieces of information that repeat across multiple documents and have them all generated at the same time while reducing the amount of repeated manual entry. So I completely understand that feedback, and the long version does have quite a few different questions. So if there are things that you would structure differently, just know that that is possible because you don't have to use the pre-built form. You can actually automate these documents yourself with the process and the way that you like to interact with them. And then that way you can actually just run it and have it structured the way that you like it. So I hope that kind of makes sense there. And so just know that the way that I would build something might be different from the way that this was built or the way that you would build something. And Gavel is a flexible enough tool to allow you to both use and be sent or whatever copied to your account workflows that were created by other people. Or you can customize how you're presented this information and what questions you're asked and what conditions are used, because you're able to actually build workflows and questionnaires yourself. So for those of you that are not familiar with Gavel, when I say things like questionnaires and workflows, I mean these things interchangeably, and it just means a set of and series of questions and answers, similar to how you see here, where I'm saying select the forms that you'd like to create. you select which ones you want to fill out right now, and you go through and answer a series of questions that will populate those relevant pieces of information in your document. So that will make all those different check marks, that will go through and put the petitioners and the respondents' name throughout all of these different documents. That will also use that logic to decide when certain things show or hide in your documents, or even which documents show at all. So that's really good feedback. So the question in the chat is, I thought if we pulled with the pre-built, we would ruin the pre-built. So that's a good point as well. So I used, for this example, so this is a good way of actually explaining this. So what he's saying is that when you use someone else's pre-built workflow, there are some things that are really sensitive to changes because it's, for example, let's say you use, the person uses to recognize or identify this question. They use underneath this question a variable name called petitioner, but you want to change it and you want to say like contact full name, then you're going to have to change the variables in the documents as well. So that's why there's some things that you want to know before you make changes, how those changes affect what's going to happen in your document. So you are able to, for example, what I usually do if I ever want to make any changes, before I make any change on anything, I duplicate the workflow and give it a new name that I can recognize as the one that I'm working on and testing. And you can even see in this particular example, I've added something called default values, because I know that every single time I want to run this particular workflow, I'm going to usually be preparing all of the documents. So I don't want to have to individually click them every single time, which is the way that it was set up originally. So what I've done is I've gone into the editor and I've said, make the default answer every time I say run this workflow, that all of these are checked. Additionally, make it a default value that you pull the information from, or like that you always have this particular one checked, but you have the ability to change it if you need to. So you are able to edit these. It's just about knowing how what you change is going to affect what happens in your document, or what that would likely break from what the person built before, if that makes sense. So let me see. Right. So Maddie has put in the chat in an answer to that kind of question around what happens if we like edit this, for example. You can, for example, like change the wording of a question. And that's like, if you say, what is the petitioner's full name versus just petitioner's full name, that won't really change anything in your documents or in the workflow or break anything. It's just those different pieces, maybe like moving things around. So I think that's going to be a really good question. And what you could do is actually just jump on a support call where Maddie or one of the other CST or customer success team members can just kind of highlight what the different pieces are that you would want to be aware of before you make any changes. But just know that I physically changed a duplicate or a copy that I made of the pre-built workflows that you see on the Gavel website to do this example. So just know that it is possible. You just want to be aware of what you're changing and why. So let's say, for example, that in this case, like I said, because it's a demonstration, I also added all of these different pieces of information that are default values. So for example, you would actually put obviously your own client's real information here, and I'm just using an example. But note that you wouldn't have to necessarily type all this information each time, because of the fact that we can push information from one place to another, or have that information collected from our client and then just answer additional questions. So let's go back a little bit because we got a little bit deep into a couple of concepts that we haven't really covered yet with kind of addressing that question, which is a great question. So when we log in to Gavel as an account or a platform, you're going to encounter what looks like this screen, where you have the ability to create and manage all of your different workflows or questionnaires. And from here, we can run them. which means that we are going to actually fill out the information like you saw me do here. So we just have to automate all these documents, one, get them into the format that we want, so that when we want to actually prepare these documents for a real case, all we have to do is we don't have to go through the process of actually like dropping our documents in and making the questions. When we're ready, we just say run. So we can come over here to the right-hand side where these purple buttons are and just say run. And from here, we can start filling out our information. And any information that we enter here is going to get stored in something called our data manager. The data manager and variables, this concept of what identifies each question, is the part that's going to be really important for making any edits or creating new questionnaires, with the understanding of how changes affect how you're able to use these different workflows or questionnaires. So for example, if I wanted to have my client fill out some of this information so that I'm not copying and pasting or like referring to my notes or something like that, I can just directly get some of this information from my client and maybe give them any directions on which parts to leave blank or whatever else. What I can do is I can assign a workflow to a client if I want to, or I can just give them the link, let's say in an email or whatever else. For example, for this one that I'm working on here, if I want to assign this to someone, I just say assign this workflow, and they're going to get an email that says, please fill this out. And then they can just go into assign into their client portal or create an account and fill out their information, view their past answers. So right now I can see that I've already assigned this to one person, and I can see like what they've entered. I can duplicate a workflow. That's what I was suggesting. If you ever want to try to play around with anything that was built by somebody else, I would suggest duplicating that workflow so that you always can refer back to the original and you have that still working without, you have a safe place to try and experiment with different changes. And then if you wanted to just copy the link and give it to someone, you can just say copy workflow link here. So in our case, we sent this workflow or this questionnaire to our client via email to have them fill it out. So what that looks like is they get an email that says they've assigned a workflow to you, sign into your Gavel portal in order to take this or run this. They can sign into a place that looks like this, and they can say run. And I can see that I've already completed this in the past, so I can view any past answers I might have already given. And if I try to run the same workflow again, which is fine, they can, or in this particular case, I guess there's an error. Oh, I think I had actually deleted this for this person that session. So if they say run and they've already completed that information before, then any information that they've already answered is going to automatically populate. So if they've already answered any questions about forms, court information, but I haven't answered any questions about this, then I'm only answering questions that I haven't already answered in the past. So you'll see that like some of these are already pre-filled out because I've already answered that question. And I'm only presented with questions that I haven't previously completed. And when a person, a client, for example, fills out that information in their client portal, or if I've just copied the link and sent it to them, I'm able to see their answers in my data manager and use that in the future. So what that sometimes looks like is that I can have a client intake questionnaire that I use as kind of like the base thing that I always send to people before we meet together. And I send that to them either by the, I either send that to them from the assign workflow feature, or I can send that to them from the, just like sending them the link. So I can see, for example, that somebody has completed this information before, so from our intake questionnaire. And if I want to, I can take the information that is in this session and call what's called push this information into another questionnaire to complete other, so for example, to complete other documents. So anything that would repeat here, such as the person's name and any other information they've given us about their email address or their mailing address or whatever else, I can take that and say, I want you to push that into my engagement agreement. So the flow here would be, we've given someone this questionnaire to fill out for our client intake process. We want to be able to reuse now that information across our documents. So I'm saying take the session information from this particular one. And then I want you to take that and reuse anything you can in my engagement agreement document. And only ask me questions that we haven't already answered before. So in this case, we've skipped the client's information section and we're only getting asked these other questions, such as who's the responsible attorney for this case? Let's say it's me. What's the matter title? I can change this, or I can choose from a list, whatever I want to do here. I can change the compensation amount if I need to. I can decide which services will be included. This is an example of something called a repeating item, where it means that we don't know from matter to matter, it's going to be different, or person to person, it will be different, what services are included and how many. It would be different for things like children, grandchildren, shareholders, or heirs, beneficiaries, guardian, whatever the case may be. We don't know in advance for each person or matter. So we need to have an unlimited ability to continue to add different pieces here. We can do the same thing for excluded services, and we can add more if needed. And then we can go through and we didn't have to retype any information that we've already collected in the past. So from here, we're also able to have this document generate. And since I've set this up to be linked to DocuSign, after I've taken a second to review this document, so here, for example, I can see that the date has pulled through, our client's information and email have pulled through in different configurations. I've been able to see that if I had said that the attorney was Demi E. Demo, then I have conditions in the document here saying, if that's the case, then show her signature block. But if I say Brittany, then show my signature block. So we can add those conditions as well. I'm also able to see that the scope of the services has pulled through, as well as the consideration, and so on throughout the document. But also when I'm ready, I just say submit for signing. That's going to send the DocuSign envelope over to the client first, because that's the way I have it set up. They'll go ahead and sign that, and then it will automatically send it over to the responsible attorney. They'll sign it, and then both parties get a copy at the end. So that's how we can start to streamline that old process to be something more streamlined. I know we kind of went a couple of different directions in the beginning, just because I really wanted to address that question, which I think is really great feedback as well. It's like I mentioned, a lot of the time it will come down to how you want to be presented with the information. So maybe in your case, it would be better for you to actually work one-on-one with a Gavel expert, or create these or build these out yourself using Gavel, because then it sounds like you're very particular about how you want to be presented this information, quoting you, for example, saying that some things were dense. So if you wanted to streamline how that looks for you, then you could get on a call with our team and just kind of go through what is the problem, what are you having problems with the way that it's structured, and how can we either configure the way that the current one is, so you don't have to spend time making it all from scratch, or what would be a better way for you to be able to interact with that information that works better for the way that you work. And that's the flexibility of the tool that I was mentioning, that it allows you to do either one. You can either use the one that's pre-built, or make your own, or edit or modify the one that we have. So I hope that helps to address that question as well. And let's go ahead and go back to where we were. So we saw the old way. We've kind of got an example of the new way, which not every single person is going to want to work with their clients in the same exact way. So for example, sometimes people will at this juncture ask me, I work with a lot of clients that don't have access to a computer or don't know how to really even use email. So I think it will be a bit of a leap for them to try to log in somewhere and type in their information, and they're going to get lost. So the way that we can address that is, instead of having assigning that to your client or sending them the link and having them kind of struggle on their own, you could have yourself or someone on your firm team, like a paralegal or whomever else, just have them on the phone, collect the information, and your team member just fills in the information. So that way it's still getting stored in a way that's more reusable in the future. That's kind of what we want to think about here. Is it's just a mindset of how can we create a unified, streamlined system that optimizes the experience for both ourselves and for our clients. So for me, for example, I work with an attorney who created my LLC for me, and I am able to log into a client portal, see all of the different times I've run a session in the past, for example, or what documents I've already completed. And it's just really easy to kind of interact. And I prefer that as a kind of a more modern consumer, you could say. So that's kind of the direction that we're seeing people go, is through a more streamlined system that benefits both parties. So it's a really exciting time in the law. So before we go into the kind of practice elements of this to be able to practice ourselves using the different forms, does anyone have any additional quick questions at this point? And I really appreciate the questions, and we're not afraid to kind of address something that you don't even like, for example, like we just kind of showed. So if you have some feedback you want to put in the chat, and do let us know. And also happy to have Maddie pitch in or give her thoughts as well. Okay, at this juncture, we're gonna go through some of the different ones that are currently available, and then we're gonna go through and use an example ourselves to kind of get some practice there. So what we're talking about when we talk about pre-built or no setup automated forms is if you go to the gavel.io website, then you're going to be able to see the ones that are already pre-built, which you can use to just get a sense of how people automate forms, or to just use them to actually prepare your documents. So if you go to that section that I just put in the chat, you'll be able to filter by jurisdiction as well as practice area. Obviously, today we're covering family law, so I'm showing that example. But you can see that we have different jurisdictions and different practice areas because Gavel is not specific to jurisdiction or practice area, because at the end of the day, Gavel is not the forms. Gavel is the system that was used to create the forms, and this is just one. These are just examples as well as live things that you can actually use to produce these documents in a more automated way. So the ones that we currently have available are some for California family law. You can see things like child custody, continuing divorce. The short forms and this kind of more long form, you could say, is what I was saying about the difference between how thorough it is. So maybe, for example, with the one that was mentioned earlier, that's maybe the long version where it's going through every single piece, where the short version is taking all those things that repeat a ton and populating all those different documents, but you would still need to enter whatever additional information. Petition to initiate divorce and so on. You can see also some Michigan family law ones, as well as some Minnesota forms, as well as the New Jersey guardianship form. And so when you test these out, you can say, try workflow. So the one that we were kind of playing with just now, or I was just showing you, is this one called petition to initiate divorce short form. So if you say try workflow, you're able to access this right now and see for free like what this populates, and actually populate these documents. So I can say, okay, I'm gonna, at the end of this, be able to produce these different documents. If you don't want to populate all of them, you can just select individually which ones you want to work on right now. If you want to have the workflow added to your account, like we talked about, where you would want to be able to change how the questions are worded, or talk to our team about how you would duplicate it and then make any changes that would suit better the way that you like to work, or how you want to have the questions presented to you or to your clients, then you would say request access. So you would say request access, You would need to do this after you already have a Gavel account started. So if you don't have one already, you would say start a free trial or get started up here at the top, and then put in what's called your subdomain. In our case today, we're working on a practice account that I created for us. And a subdomain is just this part right here, the part that comes before gavel.io. So in your case, this would be something different. This would be something like whatever your law firm's name is, or whatever you said that you wanted this to be when you signed up. So you can see all of the different options here. You can try them out. You can see what's included. But if you don't see something for your jurisdiction and you want to request that something is built out, a form set is built out, you can go to this board. I'll put this in the chat as well, to request a document set be completed or created. So here you'll be able to see which ones are planned, which ones are in progress, which ones have already been requested, and you can upvote them. You could add a new one if you don't see yours. It looks like there are some for Indiana and New York and New Jersey and Maryland. So just thinking about what would you want and just add it if it's not there. But if you are wanting to use this right now and you don't have to wait for someone else to build it, then we'll show you today how you can build it yourself as well. But just know that these are the ones that are already built out. And the purpose of this initiative and campaign is really just to think about the fact that there are so many standard forms in family law, as well as probate and estate planning and different kind of areas of the law, where we could automate that for you, and you can just use this one that's already built out, or you can have it added to your account and edit it to the way that you want it to be presented to you, with the consideration of how changes will impact how the document and the workflow is currently set up. Okay, so when we're using automated forms and how we think about this is that we're able to, sorry, I'm trying to get this thing to go away. Think about that kind of unified, streamlined system and how we can go from clicking on one of these already pre-built out ones to actually completing all of the different questions, to populating all 13 or 14 documents at once with the different information included. And also considering that this isn't this isn't just like just a mail merge type of thing where you're just only taking basic information or static information. What's really cool about this is there's a dynamic element to this, both in the questionnaire itself and in the documents that we generate at the end, which means that, for example, if I had said that I only wanted to generate the petition and the notice and acknowledgement and the property declaration right now, then only those documents would populate and show at the end, because we have logic in the back saying, show this document at the end if the person said in the first question that they want to generate this document. Also, in the documents themselves, we have logic and conditions around each of these different pieces, right? So we have the static information like somebody's name, and we've put where we want that to go. But we have the dynamic information as well of which person is this document relating to, which requests are we working on right now, and so on throughout each of these different documents. So that's how we can conceptualize and think about these documents from the old way that we used to do things to what we can do now. I've already kind of mentioned that you can request or upvote documents for your jurisdiction on the link that I sent you in the chat. So just consider that if you want to use that, if you want to use the ones that we have and that's in your jurisdiction and practice area, then great. If you don't see it, you can request or upvote what's already there. Okay, so I really want us to be able to start working within our actual accounts that I set up for all of you. So you would have received, unless you signed up like 2 minutes before we started, I've sent you an email that gives you your login instructions for your practice account that we're going to use right now. So if you could pull your email up and just make sure that you can locate that information and make sure that you can sign into your account. So it would be something like, it will say that I want you to go to workshop.gavel.io and use the login information that I sent you, which will look something like Gavel practice plus a number at gmail.com. And then your password will have a couple of numbers and an exclamation point. So has anyone had any issues logging in? If you could just send me a note in the chat, that would be perfect. We want to make sure everyone is able to kind of follow along at this point. Okay, so I'm going to assume, since I don't see anyone in the chat, that everyone was able to log in. Just let me know if you have any issues. Once you log in to your account, you're going to see something that looks like this, unless you were actually still, even if you were on some of our previous calls. I sent you some new workflows to play with today. So you should see something that has a number, and then it would say, for example, we're going to have 003C, California Family Petition for Divorce, short version example with default values. This is obviously a way too long name, but it helps me remember what it is. And then you're just going to click here where it says add to workflows. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow you to have that be something that you can now go and edit or run or assign or delete or copy or whatever you want on your actual account versus the one me just sending it to you. You get to choose, right? You can discard it, you can add it to your workflows. This is something that you with a Gavel account can also do, which would be, for example, if you're sending somebody else who's building something for you, for example, on your account wants to send you the final version, they would just say send a copy to the build to your particular account, and then you would be able to add that to your workflows. So you'll see three. You should see three. There should be one that has the code 001A, and then it says something like intake questionnaire with default values. You're going to see one that says 002A. That's going to be an engagement agreement. And then this third one is going to be 003C, California Family Petition for Divorce short version example with default values. Now, does everyone see those three different workflows, and have you added those to your workflows? Or has anyone not gotten to that step? Now, what you'll also not necessarily notice, because it's happening kind of in the background, is when you do this, it's also copying over all of the different templates that are associated with each of these workflows. So for the petition for divorce one, it's adding, I think, about 13 different documents for you. And where you see those are going to be in your document templates. So let me get over to there. So for example, you can see from your dashboard here, you would have seen all those ones to add the workflows at the top. You would see them get added, and now they're ones that look like mine in a darker purple. And if you see on the left-hand side where we were looking at the data manager before, there's a section called files. And files, it has document templates, CSV files, and images. Under document templates, you'll be able to see that all of these different documents have now been attached to your account. You don't need to do anything with them. It's just to note that that happens automatically. And then also to note that if you say CSV files, you'll see that because I'm the admin of this account and I've added a CSV file to this, you can all automatically see these CSV files as well. You can download them, etc. Now we have some of these that we're using in our current workflows, so don't delete it. But just to know that I didn't have to manually add a CSV file to each of your accounts. It's just because we're all in the same firm in this example, we can all share a CSV file that has the purpose of having a CSV file here, and what you're going to see how we use it is for things that have a lot of information attached to them. For example, like there's a long list of things that are usually the same, that are like always standard the same. So for example, like things like countries or counties, or in this case, we're doing court counties, and they have the information included here. We have the county, the branch, the mailing address, the street address, the zip code. We have the all the information about all of these different courts in California, so we don't have to manually enter them every time. We have a CSV file that contains all of this information, and we can just select which one we want and use any of the information about that particular court in our documents. So it makes it a lot easier and faster to work with that kind of information. We always want to be looking for these different ways that we can streamline the process of preparing these documents. Okay, so if everyone has logged into their accounts successfully and you've added these workflows to your accounts successfully, then what we're going to do next is we're going to play with the one that I showed you before. We're going to just like slow it down a little bit, and then I'm going to show you what that looks like under the hood, or what does it look like where we actually create these workflows and what's happening between that view versus what the taker of the workflow or questionnaire sees. So if you can look for the one that says 003C, California Family Petition for Divorce, short version example with default values, you're going to go over to the part that says run. Run, that purple button. Now, we're going to prepare all of these documents at once. Because, like I said, we could either push information into this from something that our client, or let's say that our client filled some of this out. In our data manager, we could just say continue. So you would find whichever one, and then you would just say open to continue what other additional questions haven't been answered. Or if this has already been run and you just want to download the documents that were produced, you would say download. That's going to come out as a zip file. So I can see, for example, that this person, which would actually say their name, obviously I'm just keeping this as a practice account. You can see what they've entered, download or continue the workflow here. And then this one is just like if you needed them to finish something, you could give them this link here, which would say it has saved all the answers that they've put in before. So just know that you could either start this from the beginning, which we've done right now from saying run, or you can reuse information from a past session, such as a client intake form, or because your client has filled out information. So from here, now that we've said run, we're gonna choose which forms we'd like to create. As I mentioned, I've made it to where by default, these are always all checked. But if I wanted to, I could deselect some as well. If right now I'm only preparing a few. So let's keep all of these checked for now. And then we're gonna say continue. In this case, as I mentioned, since we're doing a demonstration, I have some dummy data that is the default value here. Or imagine that you push this into this from something else. We have our petitioner's name, our respondent's name. If there was any other party, parent, or claimant here, we would put their information here. Which of the following applies to the party's resident? So in this case, the petitioner's been a resident for at least 6 months. So you can just leave that one checked. What's the legal relationship between the parties? In this case, they're married. But if we wanted to do information for domestic partners, we could do that. If there's any minor children in the case, yes or no. In our case, we have 2 natural or adopted children from this relationship, and some of them are minors. Select the following custom orders you'd like to request. In this case, we're going to request child custody orders and child support orders. If we wanted to add in visitation or spousal support or anything else, we could as well. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm glad that you're able to see kind of, how we're working on this one now versus maybe your experience before. Now, something that I changed, so remember, like I said, I copied the one into my account that is on that kind of full page with all of the different ones here. I asked the team or requested access to this workflow to be added to my account, and then I went and made changes. One of the changes that I made was to make it easier to like select information from repeating items. So in my case, I have the child's name kind of like hard coded in for this example. But one thing that isn't hard coded in, but has kind of a reference to something else that you can also apply in your case, is the information about the parents. So I will show you what that looks like in a second, but just to note that you can, in subsequent pages in the questionnaire, refer back to something that was entered before. So we've already entered Demetria and James's name and information. So I can pull that information from the same workflow into future pages like I'm doing here. So I can say, take that, and I want you to put it in the answer to this question. So that's what I've done here. So in this case, for the child's name, for the first one, we're going to choose Malcolm. The birth date, we're going to choose the first one, January 1st. The child's age then would be 4. So for example, maybe you have, like, you could do different calculations that do this, or you can just say 4. Who should have legal custody of this child? You can be joint. And notice that this is something called a combo box. So it's a combination of something where you can select from a list, or you can type a new answer. So it's just giving you options that are preset for you to make it faster. So I'm not standing here or sitting here in front of you and typing in answers. I can pull if I want Demetria or James to be options, or I can have things like joint, or I can type in something new. That's called a combo box question. So this is going to be joint. Who should have physical custody? Let's say joint. What's the support for this child based on the child support guidelines? I can have different amounts based on that guideline. Maybe I have a CSV file or whatever else if this is something that's standard, but likely you would need to type it in. And if not by the guideline, what's the amount? That's not required because we already said that we're using the guideline. Now I want to add another child because they have 2 children. So I'm going to say add another. So if you didn't see that, it's here at the bottom. Add another. That will allow me to add a second child here. So the child's name in this case is going to be Mackenzie. Their birthday is March 4th, 2023. They're 2. So who should have legal custody of this child? We're going to say joint here as well. And then that's going to be $1,500. I saw something in the chat, so let me just double check. Yeah, so combo box questions means fill it in, like you can type in whatever you want, or you can have pre-set answers that you can choose from. So that's how that works, which I love combo boxes. They're very useful. And then if there were more children here, we could add another, but in this case, they only have 2. So here we're gonna at the bottom say continue. And then if we forgot after we said continue, we can always edit here, delete, or add another from here. We're gonna say continue. I'm just gonna double check the chat because there's a couple of questions here. Yeah, great. I'm glad that we're getting to answer some questions for you today as well. So also what's cool about combo boxes, as you can see here, is I've added a default value for this. So if I'm usually the attorney who works on these types of matters, I can make it to where my name is usually here. If we have multiple people in the office that would generally do this kind of stuff, then, or I can select from a list. In this case, I just have me as a list and I'm the default. Now, this is where the CSV question comes into play. I'll show you what the CSV file information has so you know what we're pulling from. So let me just get into Google Sheets for a second. This one. So what we're pulling from in this question is kind of what I was saying. We want to find all the ways that we don't have to type in information that repeats a lot or that is standardized. So for example, this is a list of the California courts and their counties and their branch names and their street addresses and all this different information. So if I type in our questionnaire, search anything kind of from those different options. So for example, if I'm looking for San Diego, I can see the options for San Diego. If I'm specifically looking for the North County one in San Diego, then even though this line doesn't say North County, it's looking and pulling and searching from the branch names, even though I'm only seeing the San Diego and their street addresses. So that's just to say, when I showed you over here, the file for the CSV, this is the one that is what we're interacting with right now. And the content that is behind that is this information. So if I choose North County, which I want you to type in here, and I select this option, then I now have access to all of that other information. And in my workflow, I've said where I want which type of information to go in my documents. So I'm not having to type all this core information. Let me just quickly check. Saves a lot of, 150 issues. Awesome. Okay, perfect. I'm glad this is I'm glad I'm getting to show you this because it's not something that I showed in probate or estate planning. But I do think it's really powerful that we're able to pull information from all these ones. So is this populated? Gavel has this data in CSV for subscribers. So Maddie, can you confirm this? If someone requests this one, do they get this CSV file as well?
Yes, it will be in there. It wasn't always in there, Galen, so you guys might have requested this before that. So we could give you an updated version. And that's for pro customers have access to these workflows.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. So, and you can also think about this, how you would use this in multiple different contexts, right? For example, I also have on the same CSV on a different tab here, attorney information. So if you have like a large firm and you want to have like everyone's information, something that we could populate across multiple things into multiple documents, you can do the same, apply the same concept. It's not just for this one context. So just keep that in mind as well as you're thinking about how you might build something using these different CSVs. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue. Now that we've chosen that, our attorney information here, for example, I have just some dummy information, firm's information, telephone and email address. Right now, the way that this workflow, I have it set up is when all of the documents are generated, I'm going to have the option to download them at the end on the screen. And also at the same time, these documents are getting emailed to this email address. So what that means for you is that I can show you what that's going to look like when we get to the end. But if you want this to be sent to your email address in this example, then change this email address to whatever you want to have the document sent to for as we're practicing. But right now, the back of this is the underlying thing that I've built here is set up to send the documents to this kind of fake email address, but I have access to it so we can kind of play with it. In this case, I represent the petitioner. My client is 35, and then let's say we haven't been given a case number yet. So I think we can go ahead and continue here. Okay, under the marriage information section, we're going to say that this is for dissolution for a marriage. And if we had said legal separation or nullity, we would see different questions down the line here. But I have this set up to where it's dissolution for marriage and it's not an amended petition. Then we can say which forms we want to generate here. Requests for order, which what do we want the court to make orders on? In this case, child custody, spousal parents, partner support, child support, and anything else. If we were trying to do attorney's fees or costs, domestic violence order, property control, or any other situation, we could add those here. We're going to continue. Child custody and visitation. What are the details of the child custody and visitation requests? Orders request for child custody specified in this particular form. So you can kind of see that we're just kind of going down and answering these different questions, but different conditions are being activated or triggered in the workflow and in the documents as we answer these questions. We can see the other questions that are asked here. Continue. We have our server information. This could also be a CSV file question, for example, if you work with the same servers a lot or whatever else, then you can have their information kind of populate here. In this case, I just had this kind of as a default value. And then a registered California processor, what their registration number is, what county they're in. And now we're at this end piece. Now, this is the difference between the short form and the long form, like I mentioned. The long form would go on a lot more, asking about a lot of different information, including like assets, expenses, all of the different information, people who live with you, with the petitioner or whatever else. So we can review this information. If we need to edit something, we just click on the pencil right here next to any of the things that we need to edit before we try to actually populate or generate these documents. And then the moment of truth, we're going to say continue here at the bottom. It's going to take a minute because it's going through quite a lot of logic across multiple pages. So just give it a second to go through and populate the FL 110, the FL 100, the FL 300, and all the different FL forms that we have just worked on. And then, yeah, so so we said the 150 killed our enthusiasm. That totally makes sense. I get that. Okay, got it. So actually the funny thing is that when I was preparing for this, I also was feeling very bad for every family lawyer who has to fill out all of this information for all of your different people. But knowing that the option is there to populate these documents and to structure it the way that you want is really powerful. So just know that there is a solution to what you're saying. We just need to have a little bit more knowledge around how to do it, it sounds like, which is obviously one of the reasons that we're doing this workshop today, because we want you to be able to use your accounts to their full potential. So as you can see, we've been able to, from the information that we collected in the questionnaire, populate all of these different documents at the same time. So you can see we have our 100, our 110, our 115, our 117, our 140, our 141, 142, 144, 150, 155, 160, and 300. Now, if you wanted to individually review before you download all of these, you can just click on the PDF and see that all the information has been entered where you wanted it to go. Maybe you want to like add any different additional pieces as needed. But if you wanted to download all of them at the same time, at the bottom of this screen, if you scroll all the way down, under this section that talks about emailing the documents, you could email them to someone, but right now I have it set up to automatically email to myself. Or this bottom part, all the way at the bottom, it says download all documents as a zip file. So we can say download all. And when you save that, it's going to save on your desktop as a zip file. You just click on it twice. It will give you your folder. You can open that. And that's going to show you all of your completed documents, similar to how we looked at these documents in the beginning, where it comes out like this. And I can go through and I can see all of the completed documents for this person, right? That all this information has pushed through, including the court information, the petitioner's information, the attorney's information, in all of the different documents, as well as in all of the different places within the documents where things might repeat. So that is how we're able to very quickly reuse this important information and fill out these multiple documents at once. Now, as I mentioned, this is kind of the short version, so there would be more that you would do here, but in the long version, you could have all of them. I'm going to quickly check the chat here. Let's see.
Yeah, so Galen was just mentioning that the CSV wasn't always available, and
Okay.
that's true. We actually updated these because we thought that would be helpful to have all that CSV information that you wouldn't have to fill out manually.
Yeah.
So that changed.
Perfect. Yeah, and I guess that also kind of shows you that we're constantly trying to make these worthwhile and useful to you. Our team is very focused on like being responsive to what you're saying, right? So if you give us that feedback, we're going to see how we can implement that. Okay, so we've gone through and we've played with that. And the other thing I want to show you now that we've ran all this information and we've either had it automatically emailed to ourselves, or we've downloaded this as a zip file. In my case, I'll quickly show you that this was emailed and how it came through. So for example, I have it set to say petition documents for Demetria Beatrice demonstration here. I can click on that. Please review and take any necessary follow-up actions. I can go through and I can review these and download them as needed. But all of these documents, because of the way that I have it set up, have been attached to this email that was sent to me automatically. I didn't have to manually do this at all. So you can have it set up that way too. The other thing I wanted to point out is that all of this information has, sorry, let me get to the right place here. All this information is now stored, ready for reuse and repurposing in your data manager. So as we go back to our dashboard in our practice accounts and we go to data manager by workflow, I can now go to the workflow name, in that case, this petition for divorce, and I can see the one that we just ran and all the answers that we said. And I can take this and I can push this information into another workflow, such as, let's say I need to apply for a continuance or file for a continuance. So I can say I want this one, and anything that would be underlying the same, wherever the variables underlying each of the questions are the same, that information will populate across. But if they're not the same, then they won't. So in this case, I have a couple of things that are and a couple of things that are not, so I can show you that difference. So because the name of the petitioner and the respondent name both have an underlying kind of question that we have be the same, that information has pushed from our other questionnaire into this continuance one. Who's the declarant? Are they the mother or the father? We already have answered the question about whether they have minor children, so that's populated already. So you can see we have the attorney's information. I think this question was asked in the other one, but it must have a different variable name because we don't see that this is already populated. So you can see how that's how that is affected. Is all those places like the children and the court and attorney information, we got to skip those because we already pushed it in from our other workflow questionnaires answers. And we're only answering and reviewing questions that we haven't yet answered. So that's what that looks like when we were pushing information from one to another. Okay, so I hope we're all staying with us right now. I know it's kind of a lot to digest, but one of the other things I wanted to show you is what the difference looks like between the different types of views. And we can talk about a little bit deeper about something that I've mentioned a couple times, which is called variables, because if you have never seen them or you've never interacted or created one, it's hard to visualize what that is when I'm saying underneath this, there's a variable. So let's look at that now. So if we look at the questionnaire that we've just played with, the petition for divorce short version, if I go ahead and say run like we did before, just to have it open to show you the end kind of taker view versus the building kind of editor view, then just have this tab open on the side, go back to your dashboard. And if I want to make any changes or just to see how I've created or structured this, or if I want to add new questions or change, if I fix a typo or whatever I want to do, then I can go to this button that says edit. So do that now. We're going to say edit. And I'm also going to show you how I added the default values, which I've mentioned a couple times now. So we've gone from our dashboard view where we manage and run and do a lot of different kind of stuff with our workflows and questionnaires. We've seen our kind of taker view where we actually answer and generate the documents. But now we're in a new view we've never seen before, which is called the editor view. So in the editor, you might not see this side section like I have because your toolbar is collapsed like this. So I want you to expand it by clicking on the section that says toolbar right here. So click on that, and that's going to show you all of your different pages, where a page is just a series of screens that are seen. So in this case, this is one page. After continue is page 2. After this is page 3. So those are pages. We can see that this one has 17 pages, but some of them are hidden, which is a slightly more advanced concept. But the idea being that you're able from here to like change anything, but knowing how changes affect the generated document. For example, if I wanted to change anything about how this is worded, that's kind of what we were talking about a lot earlier, all the way an hour ago in the beginning, is there are some things that will be affected in the documents if you change them, things like the variables. But if you're just changing the question title, that is just the question that's asked right here, for example, or here. If you wanted to change this to what's the client's name, then you can do that and it's not going to change anything in your documents. If we go back to our editor view, we can see that what this whole block looks like. This is called an instruction block, where we usually put like information, or if we wanted to add different images or whatever you want here, or even like a video. What this looks like on the taker view is our first page, like this. So this part where it says, welcome to the initiating divorce proceedings pre-vote workflow, short version, is what is right here. So that's the part where we have the title of a page. And this whole section from here to here is on the front end, or the taker live view looks like this, right? So that's how we're starting to put together what's happening in the back end or the editor, where we're creating this workflow or making any updates or edits to it, and what it looks like to the person who's actually using it, which could be yourself. It could be a paralegal or a law clerk. This could be your client. That's the difference between what's happening underneath each of these questions versus what the person is seeing when they're actually generating these documents for real. This question, select all the forms you'd like to create, is something called a multi-select question, which in the editor looks like this. So it has a question title where we said, select all the forms you'd like to create. That is shown to the person who's taking this. Then there's a section called a variable name, which we've mentioned a couple of times. And the variable name for this is called form requested. So if there are multiple questionnaires that we would push into each other, like I showed you before from our data manager, and some of these might be the same, for example, then we'd want to use this variable consistently, meaning we wouldn't want to have a different name for that type of question in future workflows, so that we can push information around, because this variable name is the key to allowing us to push information from one questionnaire to another, from a client intake form into an engagement agreement, the information from an engagement agreement into the documents that we want to prepare for our client, for example. And in this case, we've had the choices be FL 100 to FL 335, and maybe you wanted to add some more. Now, the way that someone adds pages and adds questions is by adding question and seeing all the different types. So if you see, there's a little button here in black that says add question down here at the bottom. You can see all the different options. And then if you wanted to add a page, that's here at the bottom right. So you can kind of see how this is a block by block kind of way of building. And you can kind of see and observe the differences between what we're doing when we're building something, building out the questions, answers, and conditions for the person to ask or answer, and what it looks like to the person who's actually taking this. Now, how I was able to get all of these to be defaulted or as a default answer, if we go into your editor, you're going to see that there's edit, logic, and settings. Under the settings little gear here, I can say which things I want to have as my default value. So I can take some off, I can say all, I can just have specific ones, depending on what you'd like to have be your default answer. The logic has to do with if I want something to only show or hide if a certain condition is met. So you can do that for questions, you can do that for pages, you can do that for documents, you can do that for so many different things. So that's how we start to build or edit or think about structuring the questions, the logic for the pages, and all that. If you go all the way to the top, just so we can familiarize ourselves with this editor view for a second, what you'll see is that we have questions, document templates, and settings. So under our questions section, that's pretty straightforward. This is where we add pages. This is where we add different question types. This is where we can add logic to our pages and questions, and so on. You can kind of see how that kind of works. If we say document templates, just click from questions to document templates here under the title here. You can see that this breaks down by different sections: documents, logic, sharing, and DocuSign. Under the document section, this is where we're connecting the documents that we want to automate to the questions that we've created. So from here, we can see, for example, if you say tag next to the FL100, we can see how this was created. So because I didn't personally build the first version of this, the one that's available on the website, I had to reverse engineer and understand how someone built this so I know what I can change and what not to change, right? That's what we kind of mentioned before as well. There are certain things that you want to be really attentive to before making any edits, because you could take off that kind of the way that, or break the way that it was built, essentially. So because all of these are PDF documents and there are no Word documents, they all look the same with this little section that says tag. When we say tag, what we're saying is take the answer to the question, or sorry, take the answer to the question forms requested, or whatever the question was, and put that answer here in the document. So what that looks like for the FL100, if you say tag, I don't want you to change anything. I just want you to look at it. So look at how it says for name, it says attorney name, firm name says firm name, etc. These are the places where I've said I want there to be either conditions. So for example, this one says, basically it's saying insert this X if the question that asks about dissolution is the answer marriage. So that's how we can add conditions around check marks or boxes in documents. For this section under minor children, it's giving me the option for no minor children or there are. So I can say, I'm just clicking on these to see this side section, by the way. You're welcome to click on them, just don't change it. So if I say, if I click on this one, for example, the minor children are, then I'm saying have this show if minor children is yes. If the person said that there are minor children in this case, you can even tag those repeating items like the children's information, for example, here. So I can say, put the child's name here and their birth date here and their age here. So I can take the variables that I created under my questions section and I can tell Gavel where to put the answers in my document. So that's that process of tagging the answers that are going to be kind of answered in the questionnaire to the documents that I want. So that's that process under documents. Under logic, what you'll see is that this is set up to where if the person answered the first question where the variable is called form requested, which on our initial kind of page when we're like taking this as a user looks to us like this. So it's saying if I said I want all of these, or if I said I only want some of these, the logic for how these documents are output at the end is happening right here in the editor under logic, where I've said if the answer to that question is FL100, then output that document. If they said that they want the 110, then output the 110. If the forms requested are proof of service, then output the service, and so on all the way through for all the documents that we have as options here. There could also be default documents that generate no matter what the person said. So just keep that in mind as well. Under sharing, this is where I said where I want the documents to be sent by email automatically. So I've said I want it to go to the attorney's email address. So I've done that by saying send finalized documents to an email address. You can have that be something that's always the same email address. For example, if you have like a shared centralized firm email address, for example, or variable in that it could be different depending on the answer that's given for that particular question. DocuSign is if I want to set these documents up to be where they can be sent via DocuSign, for example, which we kind of saw in the example of the engagement agreement. You can think about it that way as well. Okay, now under settings here, this is how I was able to change or customize the messages or what was said in the email that got automatically sent under customized messages. But I wanted to highlight under general that if you notice, you have a Gavel logo, you have a dashboard and like a sign-in thing, you have certain colors and certain fonts. If you wanted to have this match your own brand, or what we get questions about a lot sometimes is, what if I want the questions to be next to each other? So for example, their first name and their last name instead of stacked underneath each other. So anything that has to do with kind of the style of this page, you can actually customize what that looks like. Sometimes people will want to do this if they, for example, want to customize like their colors, or if they want to embed this onto their website so it matches their brand colors, you would be able to do that using this section here. And then I wanted to point out that you can change the language. So for example, the language that we're saying is of things like back, continue. These could be in different languages. And then you would just write the questions and the answers in that language because you control what those say. But if you wanted it to be that the commands here are in a different language, you could do that as well. Just something to note. Under customized messages here, we have the questionnaire and we have email. So you see how you can toggle between these two, questionnaire and email. Under questionnaire, this is going to be, for example, on the end screen when all the documents get generated, what does that say? So we could change that here to thank you, or here are your documents, or here are the documents for the petitioner, or whatever you want to say. Under email, we have the email automation. I've changed to say petition documents for, and then the petitioner in this case, please review and take any necessary follow-up actions. So you can change what this says. Now you'll notice a kind of format like this, where it has a $, a curly bracket, a variable name, and then a closing curly bracket. This is how you can structure this. It's a little bit more advanced, but just know that it's possible. That's how I'm able to pull the answer to the question where the variable is petitioner. In this case, I think that's one of the first questions on this page. Petitioner here is going to pull Beatrice's demonstration, if it's answered that way, into this part over here. So we can kind of do that thing where we reuse and repurpose variables in multiple different places. Okay, so those are the main things I wanted to highlight for you in the editor right now. There's a lot more that we could go into and do, but I don't want to overwhelm you because we're already going over a lot. So if you're already lost, please let me know and we can kind of have you meet with our customer success team. They could do a one-on-one call with you. But just for today, I want you to be able to kind of play with different aspects of this tool, experiment with something in kind of a safe practice place where it's not going to affect any of your live things that you're using with your customers or anything that are your clients, and it's not anything that you're using internally in your team. And note that you could always make duplicates and test things as you'd like. For example, when I was testing a couple of different things to prepare for today, I just created a workflow called test FL110 so that I can like play with this in a testing environment where I'm not going to break anything important. I can always create a new workflow and practice and have an environment where I can just, it doesn't matter if it breaks, I'm trying to figure something out. So just know that that's always okay. So for example, I wanted to see if I could set this FL110 up to pull information and push information around from one workflow into another. For example, in my case, I wanted to be able to see if I could pull this from the petition for divorce. Even though it has a 110, I just wanted to test something else about this into the test FL110 and see what happens. So in this case, I didn't answer anything here, so it's not pushing anything through. So it's not a good example. So let's try this one instead. So now it's passed the party information into the case number or the case information. And then if there was actually an address of the court that I had pushed through, then it would push through as well. So I keep using examples where I didn't have an answer there, but you can kind of see the concept. Also, I wanted to note that Maddie said, if anyone has questions about the workflows, you can schedule a call with Maddie on her calendar, and you can always email help@gavel.io. So thank you for that reminder. But anyway, yeah, so just to point out that you can kind of test things in different ways without breaking anything important. Okay, so now that we've kind of gone through that, let's get back on track with how to automate your own templates. We've talked a lot about pre-built workflows and no setup automated forms, meaning forms that have been built out by somebody else. So somebody that was able to take all of the standard forms and automate them for you. And if that structure, the way that I just showed you, the short version, and then there's a long version that fills everything out, if that works for you, then you can try that workflow out, test it out first, and then request that to be added to your account, and you're good to go. If you want to automate your own templates, meaning that you have some non-standard forms that you've created, and or you have forms that are standard, but we haven't built them out yet, or you want to build them out in a particular way that suits your needs better, then I'm going to show you how to do that. Before I do, I just want to pause and make sure that if anyone has any questions, we can ask them now. I'll just quickly check in. And thank you for taking all this time to spend with me. We've already been talking for about an hour and 23 minutes. So we're going to go for another 36 minutes, but I want us to be able to get a little bit more hands-on now. So I know we've kind of been in the tool a little bit, but I want us to kind of build something out next. So if you're wanting to do that, then we'll do that together. So for this, there's a couple of things that I want us to keep in mind. The first is that the first step to thinking about how we want to structure our builds in Gavel is thinking about your overall process. So usually in a law firm, it will be something along these lines where you have an intake process. You'll usually have something that you want to collect a little bit of information about this person and their matter before you meet with them. So you have, all that information. You would want to use a Gavel workflow for that point, because like I showed you, if you have them go through the process of filling that information out, or you fill it out for them on the phone or whatever else, that's a really crucial moment to collect that so that we can reuse all of their information in the future. Engagement, obviously, as I showed you, you have intake, and then you can push that into an engagement agreement, have that automatically sent off for DocuSign signature. And then you have execution, which in my head is now we're actually using our templates and our form sets to fulfill maybe execution sounds harsher than fulfillment, but we're fulfilling our services that we've been engaged in the engagement agreement for our client. So if we map out this process and we think about that, then we can get more strategic about how we automate that process. From, for example, knowing the importance of having their basic information and all that initial information collected in a strategic way that allows us to repurpose and reuse it in the future, such as in our engagement agreement. And then from there, taking the same information and pushing that into our other templates and form sets. Some foundational things we want to keep in mind here have to do with user roles and client portals, which I'll talk about just a little bit, data management and persistence, which we've seen examples of already, and variable strategy and library, or the consistent use of variable names across multiple questionnaires. So when we talk about user roles and client portals, the important thing here to note is that there are 4 different user role types that can do different things. The main categories that I want you to think about are that there are people who can build questionnaires and there are people who cannot build them, but they can take them. So as we saw, I, as an admin or a builder, can create new workflows. I can manage and see all of the different workflows. I can go into the data manager. I can push information around. I can do a lot of things that I, in the law firm, would want to be able to do. But I don't want my client to be able to see anyone else's information other than their own. And I also want my client to not be able to create workflows because there's no use for that for them. They just need to take them. So that's the differentiating factor between user roles in Gavel, is that there's people who can build things at different levels, and there's people who can take things at different levels. And the client portal is just where the person can log in, such as I showed you when you have the person who can be assigned workflows and they can see their past sessions. Data management and persistence. We've seen from the data manager how we can take information from one place and move it into another place, or reuse or repurpose that. And persistence comes from what we saw with our client, where if they've already previously answered information, then they don't have to enter it again. It just remembers that in the future. And this is because we have a consistent variable strategy. And what I like to use is something called a variable library, which is just something that helps me stay organized so that I can use it consistently. For me, what that looks like is this, which looks very crazy, but is very like conceptually simple. I have things categorized by type. So things relating to a matter, things relating to the attorney, things relating to a contact that we're talking to. And then I have consistent variables that I use across my workflows so that I can push them around, push information around, and benefit from data persistence. So in my law firm, I would want to have anyone who's building workflows, including myself, remember and reuse the same ones for the same question. So if I'm asking information about attorney or matter or services or contact, then anytime I ask about the attorney responsible in a matter, I would want to use this structure consistently for that variable. And remember, when we talk about a variable, we're talking about the part that's uniquely identifying the question in that workflow. So in our editor, the variables that we're talking about are those ones like this: forms requested, petitioner, respondent. And note that those are different from what I use. So I have my own like way of structuring these that I really like, but you might have something different. It's okay to be different as long as you use them consistently. That's the important part here. Oh, Melissa says that spreadsheet looks so handy to share. Yes, I'm happy to share this with you. I actually have a version that you can make a copy of it. So let me find that for you really quick. So I can put that in the chat, and I can also send it around afterwards as well. But yes, sorry, give me 1 second because, yeah, of course. Yeah, so it's this one here, but actually I was trying to give you a different link, sorry. So I have a bunch of like important links that I wanted to send you guys, but there's so many that I don't want to overwhelm you. So the master variable template download link, if you want to use them kind of like how I do, then you can use this link to copy this. And you don't necessarily have to use it the same way that I do. So just keep that in mind. You can have your own style. I generally like to do it this way And I was able to get this to kind of expand and collapse using something called groups. So just look up like how to use groups in Google Sheets, and you'll be able to see kind of how to make it collapse like that. So as you can see, my particular way and style of doing this has the main category and then the subcategory, right? So contact, prefix, contact, first name, contact, middle name, blah, 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 blah. So for me, generally, the contact is my client. Some people say client name, but sometimes the client is actually a company. So you want to think about how that works in your own setting. But just the point being, use them consistently across your workflows so that you can move information around and benefit from data persistence. You don't have to get as granular as this, but for someone who builds a lot, it's helpful for me to remember where I have these kind of showing up and what types they are, and whether, for example, they are invisible logic or repeating items or whatever else. You can kind of see that. Okay, so that's what that looks like. I'm glad that you think it's useful. And so that's what variables are. That's how we want to think about them. That's why they're important. And that's basically why it's my foundational element here. Okay, now let's do some practicing. So I'm going to have you download some templates, install a Word add-in, and then we're going to practice with each of these. Okay, the first thing is the downloading the templates piece. So let's do that now. Let me give you this link. As you can see, this is a Gavel workflow with some default answers. Just navigate to this page, and we're going to download these 3 templates. So just navigate to here, say continue. That's going to give you the option to download those different practice templates, the FL110, a limited scope engagement agreement, and an anti-coercion insurance disclosure. Now, I know that this example isn't family law related, but the template is a really good example of like how to use generative AI and using your in Gavel to automate your documents. So you can either download these individually here, or you can use that feature download all down here with this link. So just take a second to do that. I'm going to show you what each of these templates look like. And then we're going to practice with them. Hopefully this part is also helpful to you. Okay. So the documents that we're going to be looking at today are one that we've already seen filled out, this 110, which has, and the ones we're going to use are just going to be like, they don't have that many variables, but it will help us to kind of get a little bit of practice in, and then you can apply the concepts across other things that you work on. So we have one example that's going to be a PDF, and then 2 examples that are going to be Word documents. Now, I mentioned that we need to install a Word add-in. This is only for when you're using Word documents will you need this, but it's really important and really helpful. So what I want you to do is open any of the Word documents that I had you download. In this case, we're going to look at I'm looking at the anti-coercion insurance disclosure one, but it doesn't matter. I just need you to open a Word document right now. From here, you're going to look for the part that says add-ins. So if you already have an account and you're already familiar with this, just take a 5-second break. If you don't have this already, you're going to go to add-in, which is going to take us to our more add-ins. It's going to take us to the store or the Office store. Sometimes when you have an account with an organization, such as like your work or school or some other organization, they'll have like a central admin. So you might see something that says like contact your admin to be able to add something. If that's the case, just contact whoever is like in charge of this IT aspect of your organization so that they can unlock this for you. But we're going to search for Gavel, and we're going to say add continue. Once you do that, it's going to add a little logo here onto your ribbon. So we can say document tagger, and it's going to look something like this. We're going to say start. And from here, you're going to see that we have site, client name, and API key. Site is going to stay the same, gavel.io. For client name, we're actually going to use workshop. So I want you to manually type in workshop like this. The reason that we're using workshop is because that's our practice accounts subdomain. Remember, I mentioned subdomain before? It's the part that comes before gavel.io. In my case, and yours right now, it's workshop. But in the future, when you make your own Gavel account, it would be something else like DDRS or law firm name or whatever. And that would go here. For the API key, we're going to get that from our dashboard. So if we go back to our dashboard, whenever I say dashboard, that means the place that you get to when you sign in, like whenever you sign into your account, it's going to by default take you to your dashboard. From your dashboard, there's this side section here where you have where we've been interacting with like our data manager and our files. Under that, all the way at the bottom right here, there's a part called settings. Settings, API keys. And this is where we can make an API key and connect our Gavel account to our Word add-in. So we would give it a name, something like Word add-in is fine. In my case, I'm going to just add demo so I can delete this later. So give it a name, something like Word add-in, and then say create a key. Creating a key gives you a long string of like letters and numbers. We're going to say copy API key, and then you're going to paste that right here. So copy and paste your API key right here, and then say sign in. What this will do is it will allow you to tag, like we saw before with the PDF documents, your Word documents now. So we can still now from here interact with the different questions and questionnaires that we've created, our different variable names. And we can also add our different conditions to our documents. We could add in the different parts that allow us to use DocuSign. So now we can start really having some fun in here. So for example, we can see, in my case, I can see that I have 00A practice templates, and I can search in this box to find what I want to find. So for example, if I wanted to find the petition for divorce, my code for that is 003C. And since there are some people on here who are customers and so have their own naming structure, you might be wondering why I have it like this, like 00A, 001, etc. The reason is that workflows on your dashboard are categorized or alphabetically and numerically. So I want certain things to be at the top for when I'm showing them to you, and things that I'm not working right now, I want them to be on the bottom. So I've used the naming structure 000A for the practice templates because I want them to be all the way at the top alphabetically. I want the intake questionnaires to be second, and I want the engagement agreement to be this part here. So that's why it's numbered that way, just if you are wondering. So that's how I will structure these and look for them. And if we choose any of these, let's say we use our engagement agreement, then we can now input that information into this document if we wanted to. I don't want you to do that right now because I want to use this document for something else. But just to show you, you could highlight where you want something to go and say simple variables and choose which variables you want to use from your questionnaire. In my case, you can see some of the things that I showed you in my variable list, my map, my library or whatever, is I can say contact preferred full name first and last and insert that here. I can go through, I could add any conditions. I could say only show this whole section if something is true or false or whatever. You can kind of see how that will work when we get to that point. Now, something that makes automating your documents even faster than that is something called Gavel Blueprint, which is our generative AI feature. So as you saw on my slides, I said, let's practice using generative AI and from scratch or from a duplicate. So we're going to start with trying it out with Gavel Blueprint, which is the generative AI feature. And you'll see why that's useful. We're going to do it with both a PDF document and a Word document so you can see kind of like the similarities and differences. So if we say on our dashboard, everyone get back to your dashboard, we're going to create a brand new workflow. So from scratch or using generative AI. So if no matter what, if you want to create a new questionnaire with all new variables and all new questions and all new documents and whatever else, then you say new workflow here. You can see that you have 3 choices. You have start with questions, which would be starting from scratch, meaning you don't have anything that you're building everything from the bottom up, right? You're building out the questions, you're putting in the variable names, you're putting in the choices, you're doing everything from scratch. Starting with documents means that is what we're gonna practice right now, meaning we're using generative AI to help us do this process faster. And then you have choose a pre-built workflow, which we've already looked at before. So if you were thinking, oh, I remember that Brittany said that some of these are already built. So I'm going to just click choose a pre-built workflow. I'm going to filter for my practice area or jurisdiction. I'm going to find which one I want to use. And I can either just try it to see kind of what's going to be included. And when I'm satisfied that that's what I want, I say request access and put in my subdomain. So those are the options. Right now, we're going to say start with documents. So go ahead and click start with documents. Now, you can add a single document or you can add multiple documents at once, depending on how you want this to be structured. So for example, when whoever was creating or building out the questionnaire that has 13 or 14 different documents, it's better to have all of those in a single workflow so that you can populate all of those and generate all of those at the same time. So what you can do is you can also mix Word documents and PDF documents. And what the system is going to do is it's going to suggest different questions that you might want to use. And you can just then say that you want them or you don't. You can change them right here. And then also it's going to look for places that repeat across all of the documents so that it's going to consolidate those into that single question like we've seen in our previous examples. So what I'd like for you to do is make sure that you're at this screen where how we got here was we said new workflow, start with documents, and now we're going to add in our documents from the practice templates that you downloaded. We're going to use the one that says anti-coercion insurance disclosure, that practice template, and the FL 110 practice template, just so you can see what this looks like between a PDF and a Word document in the generative AI feature here. So just take those, and just drag and drop them here, or you could say upload and choose it from there like this. Either way, just get to this point, and then we're going to say next up here at the top right. So if you don't see it, it's up here at the top right where it says next. We're going to give this a name. In this case, you could just say like, you can say this right now. We're just going to call this a blueprint test, March 6th, and then say save. Obviously, you would give it a real name like client intake questionnaire or FL 110 and anti-coercion or whatever you want. But just for the sake of time, we're going to just call it blueprint test, March 6th. So what's happening right now is Gavel's feature here is looking for all of the different places that repeat and where it might be useful to ask a question so that we can fill out this document faster, right? And reuse things that repeat in a document. You can toggle between the different documents and look and review them and make decisions about them by clicking on the buttons where my cursor is here. So you see like ready for review, anti-coercion, you can see that that's a Word document. And over here, you can see that this is a PDF document. You can also see that the system is suggesting questions to you. It's saying, it looks like right here, they're asking, we should be asking about what's the name of the respondent, which is true. We are asking about the respondent's name. So it's suggesting, and if you say edit question details, we'll see what the variable name it's suggesting is. So in this case, it's suggesting that we type the question or we have the question for this section be, what's the name of the respondent, and the variable being respondent. Now, when you're using Gavel Blueprint, the reason why I'm showing it to you now rather than first, because obviously this is so fast, why didn't we look at this earlier? Is because you needed to understand a couple of concepts before you use this, right? Well, not necessarily, but just I want you to understand them. So we need to understand, like, where does the question go that's being suggested? And we know that the questions go here above the question, right? We know what a variable name is now, and we know that we want to use them consistently. And how have we used respondent before? Respondent's name. We haven't said respondent name, we've said respondent, right? So if we wanted to have this workflow be able to have information pushed into it, and also to have information pushed from this into something else, then we want to use this consistently. So we take off name like this, so that we have a consistent variable structure. Similar in the petitioner name. So if you notice, we have notice to respondent, petitioner's name is this. Similarly, in our previous examples, we've used petitioner without saying petitioner name. So we could verify and check this against our variable map, our library, or our previous workflows that we want to be able to push information around from here. So I can click on this yellow part and change the name of the variable to, in this case, petitioner, to be consistent with how I have it before in my other workflows. Also, this is a good example because you can note that Gavel Blueprint can read other languages. So it's noticing that this is in Spanish, and it's suggesting the question in Spanish and giving a variable name in Spanish. So we can accept or reject this. If we work with people who are generally needing like Spanish interaction, we can structure this in lots of different ways. But in our case, we're going to reject this. So if we don't want there to be a question, we don't want this question, we just reject it. Similarly, down here, when we say for the name of the petitioner, we can reject that one as well. And then you can just go through the same process for any other section. In this case, I have kind of a specific thing that I want to do here. So I'm going to reject this one as well as this one. For the date, I'm going to reject this one because I have a specific thing I can do for that, and reject this one. But you can see how quickly we can kind of go through and say, like, I don't want that one, but I like that one. But the one that I like, I'm just going to change it a little bit. So you can kind of see how you can just go through, drop your documents in, and then quickly edit them. For the questions relating to the anti-coercion insurance disclosure, let's click on that now. So you see how we can toggle back. For this one, these are pretty good. These are pretty much all that I want for these. We have like lender name, license number, borrower name, and it's recognizing that borrower name shows up multiple times in this document. As you can see, it says one of two instances, and it gives it the variable name borrower name. So what that means is if we use this little toggle here, we can go to the next instance of this borrower name variable that we're creating. And it's combining them into a single question. So imagine if this document was 80 pages long and borrower name shows up 100 times, then it's going to combine that and show us that there's 100 instances, but we're going to ask one question. So that's what it's doing here. If we wanted to change anything, we can change it here. And then also, for example, if in our case, we always have the borrower as our client, and for our clients, we use contact name or this other structure, then we would see which one we want to use and use that in that circumstance. Or if this was always going to also be the petitioner, we would use that. However you want to think about that is just knowing the concept that wherever our client plays a role here, we'd want to use that consistently with however we've used their name before. Or any other overlapping information outside of just our client's information. When we're ready to create this workflow, we are going to say draft workflow here at the top right. But before we do, I forgot one thing, which was to show you that you can change the variable type. So for example, down here at the bottom, we have date signed, and it's suggesting the variable type of date. So you can change, for example, if there's like somebody's email, for example, we could change this to an email question type. You don't have to keep all of them as text. Maybe it's an email, a date, a number, a text area, whatever the case may be. So let's go ahead and say draft workflow. And now it's going to create the workflow for us with the different changes that we've like added on, edits that we've made. And it's going to attach the 2 templates that we've been working with to this document as well. And I'm going to show you how you'd be able to make any changes to those documents if you want to, now that they've been set up. And this is going to be similar to kind of what we talked about before, but I'm going to show you a couple of differences as well. So it just takes a second for this to work. So if you're doing this at home, just give it, about 60 seconds or so, depending on how long or how big your documents are. And then it's going to take us directly into our editor, where it's suggesting also not only it's not creating just that, but it's also suggesting names for our pages. So in this case, obviously it's pulling like the information from the Spanish section. So we wouldn't necessarily want this to stay the same. So we could say something like respondent information. We could change this. We can kind of toggle between pages by clicking on the different sections in our toolbar, or by navigating up here, depending on what we want to do. So we probably change this to like petitioner's information, and you would change this to whatever you want it to be. This would be like case information. And one thing I also want to point out is that if you save this and you run this right now, it's going to look like this. But in other workflows we've worked on, we've seen a side label section like this. How do we get that? Well, we get that by going into our editor and naming the sections here at the top. So for example, if I want this section to be called case information, then I just give it a section label of case information. And if I want this part to be petitioner's information, I can name that section. Same thing for respondent's information, and so on throughout all of my documents, lender's information and borrower's information and loan information and whatever else. And if I have multiple pages that all will be grouped into that section, I would just give them the same section name. So that's how that works. What we can also take note of is under document templates. Remember, we can go from questions to document templates and settings. If we go to document templates, we can see that the documents were automatically attached here. And if we download them now, we'd be able to see that the variables have been added. So I want you to download the anti-coercion one and take a look at that. So what it's done automatically is it's taken the variable name that it created and it's putting it into the syntax of double curly brackets on either side, so that when we run this, we didn't have to do anything extra in our documents to have the code be implanted into the document. It's just going to run, and any information that we enter is going to populate those documents. Now, remember, PDF documents and Word documents are slightly different. PDF documents, we can tag them directly in our editor right here where it says tag. So I can tag and I can say, okay, so everything worked out the way I wanted it to. We have the respondent's name here and blank here. We have petitioner name here and blank here because I rejected these. We have our case number, and then I rejected these as well so that I can have my own separate thing that I want here. Great, that looks awesome. So it's already automatically done all that for me. If I wanted to tag something from any of my questions, so let's say, for example, I wanted to put something here, pretend that it's not the name and address of the court, just so I can show you this. I'm going to click here. I can either leave this untagged, I can enter text, which could be a static thing that always shows up, or I can get really fancy and do some different coding and stuff. Or I can say insert variable, which is just any of the variables that I've created in the past. Like I could even use some that weren't even specifically made for this document. See that I can see like the property address and the borrower name from the questions about anti-coercion. anything that I want can go here. So I can say like borrower name, and that's going to insert that automatically for me here. If I decide that I don't want that, I just say untagged. I can add conditions here as well. So I can say insert conditional value. If, let's say, I don't know, whatever else, if the loan number is any of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then I want the value to be none or whatever. So you can put conditions around this as well, but I'm going to keep it untagged. But just know that the conditions are usually for like things like check marks, like check this box if the answer is yes, or check this box if the answer is no. We can use them in lots of different ways. So that's how we can make changes or additions to a PDF document using this kind of structure. Now, why did we add the Word add-in to our Word, like Microsoft Word, if we weren't even going to use it? So we are going to use it. So what we're going to do is open up the practice template, the one that you just downloaded from Blueprint that already like did all the coding for you. And then what you're going to do is click on your document tagger. We're going to log in. In my case, I'm logged into a lot of different ones. So let me get to the right one. So now that we have created this blueprint test March 6th, we can search that here. So when you're looking for it, you can search it here. Click on it and you can see that now we can access any of these things. For example, if we wanted to insert a simple variable, such as the borrower's name needs to go one more place, we can search for borrower name and we can find wherever we want it to go. Let's say we need to put it here or like right here, for example. Then I can say insert that variable. And then if I'm done making any changes, I just replace this document in Gavel. So if you see on my sidebar right here, my Word add-in, I can see select a document to replace. I can find which document I want to replace, in this case, the anti-coercion one, and then I can say update in Gavel. So that's how you're able to make any changes using your Word add-in. Like I mentioned, there's a lot you can do here. You can get really complex with different numerical and date calculations. You can insert repeating items, like I showed you with information pertaining to all of the different children, and so on. But that's how you're able to make it to where you don't have to make changes, re-add it, or do anything. You just take your document, download it with all the different ones that you already have, make any changes, and then say update in Gavel. So now, whenever we want to prepare these two documents, it will look like this to us. We don't have to go through that process all over again. We just go through that process one time to set this workflow or this questionnaire up. And from here, we can just always generate it. So I know we only have about a minute or two left. So I'm just going to quickly give you just an overview that we do have Gavel experts that can help you with all of these different build outs if you want to get really fancy. We've seen some trends towards people creating sort of more client-facing workflows that they can pay for, that a client could purchase for a flat fee, for example. And here are some examples of companies that do that. Pricing-wise, if you don't already have a Gavel account, this is the pricing where we have kind of low to more of like the best value is that pro tier where you can have these added to your account. For today, I want you to go to start.gavel.io and use this link to sign up for a free trial. And when you want to upgrade or activate to one of the plans, then use the code workshop50 or workshop5. Workshop 50 gives you 50% off your first month, and workshop 5 gives you 5% off of an annual plan one time. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time today. For all of you that stayed with me for 2 hours, I really appreciate your time. You can also just reach out to me directly at Brittany@gavel.io if you have specific questions about what we talked about today. But I'd also encourage you, if you want to have kind of like a one-to-one strategy session with our team, then you can do that from the website and say get a demo. And then they can actually go through your documents with you and kind of like walk through what the scenario is. So I know we're at time, so if you need to go, feel free to go. I'm going to stop the recording now. And then if you have any questions, we can just chat. So let me just see if there's anything in the chat. Aw, thanks. And hi, Melina. It's nice to see you. And then thank you, Maddie, for putting that in the chat. So like I said, if you need to go, I've already used up so much of your time. I hope it was useful. Feel free to go. But if you'd like to stay and ask any questions, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes to answer them directly. Hi, Melissa. How are you?
Good. I have a question. When you pulled up the document and it went to Spanish, how did that, was it set up in Spanish? Did it do automatic translation?
So yeah, so if you notice for the FL 110 you're talking about, right?
Right.
Yeah. So the FL 110 has two sections that are in Spanish. So what happened is the Gavel blueprint is recognizing that there's English parts and there's Spanish parts. And if it was Swedish or Dutch or whatever, it would recognize those differences. And it's recognizing that if you're asking questions in the document or you have pieces in the document that are Spanish, then you might be wanting the questions to be in Spanish as well. So that's what's happening there. But we rejected them because we're like, oh, well, in our case, we might structure this differently because we're using it internally and we don't need to have the Spanish section. Does that make sense?
Understood. Yeah, it does make sense.
Good question. Maddie, were you going to
But
add to that?
what that also means is just that if you had a document all in Spanish or
Yeah,
something, you could upload it and automate in Spanish for people working in other languages.
right. Did you have more questions there though, Melissa? I want to make sure.
Well, I was sitting there thinking, like, especially in various pockets, there's a huge population of Spanish speakers. Maybe their English is good. So can I use the tool to, make it in English and then also do a translation using the print or something like a translation so that you have both versions? For
Yeah, that's interesting. So because like I said, there's kind of multiple ways that you could think about how you structure this. So for example, let's say that you want to have like an English version of this and a Spanish version of this. You could either have a question in the beginning that says like, do you need this? Or like, do you speak Spanish or do you speak English? Which do you prefer? Have a question that helps you branch logic off to ask questions in different languages. And then you'd have the conditions for the documents that are output at the end based on that question. So if somebody said that I prefer Spanish, then you'd have conditional logic around the Spanish documents and versions to generate those ones at the end and hide the English ones. Does that make sense? And then otherwise, you could make two separate questionnaires, one in English, one in Spanish, and you give your Spanish clients Spanish link and you give your English clients the English link.
that makes sense. But what I'm thinking is if they're ever going to use this document, our court system, it needs to be in English. But if I to truly understand what they're saying or the roles that they're determining from an estate planning perspective,
Gotcha.
then I would really want it to be in their natural language.
I understand. I gotcha. Okay, so the way that you would do that is you get to control what the questions say. Obviously, like in that instance, the questions were asked like in some of them were suggested in Spanish because the document had Spanish in it. So you could keep those as they are. But if there were also other things in this document that you needed to have, like the continue button needed to be in Spanish as well, that's where that settings would come in, where you choose the language. So like things like continue and back and this part here where it says like you need to fill this in would all be in Spanish. And then you can type these questions in Spanish as well. And then the documents could still be in English, but all of the things that the client is seeing are in Spanish. Does that make more sense to you of like how the differences between like the questionnaire and the documents? Because like you said, if the documents need to be in English, then you need them to be output in English, but we need to talk to our clients in Spanish.
Right.
So yeah, so that's how you would kind of structure that. And if for example, there are selections, like in this one, there's like selections, and the selections would equate to something in English, but we need them to be in Spanish, then what I would suggest, there is a way to do that, but it would like take a little bit more time to explain it. So I think what you could do is You could use some invisible logic, for example. If you, I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but if you could say, for example, like if the person selected this Spanish option in the document, output this English phrase or select this English option or whatever. So that's kind of how you could do that. Or you could just use the conditions in the PDF itself. So because there, if it's like a check mark, for example, you don't necessarily have to go that fancy route. But yeah, it's a really good question though, because like you said, there's definitely situations where you might need to talk to the person in Spanish, like interact with them that way, but the documents need to generate and populate in English. So that's a good use case to consider.
Thank you.
And Melissa, I think you had signed up for all of our sessions, right?
I did.
But you came to the other ones, right? Or no, just this one?
I
Okay,
did.
perfect. Did you find like that was
Yeah.
useful?
Well, I was late for one,
Okay.
and then I started going through the video and trying to do something, and then I'm like, but
Okay.
you just reviewed it. You just reviewed
Oh,
like
perfect.
part of it. So I'm going to go back and practice a little bit more.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much for your interest in hanging out with us. And I know that it was a long session and that I'm keeping you even more long, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, or you can reach out to our customer success team at help@gavel.io. Also, hi to Michael for being here. Maddie says you're like a super user, right? So happy to see you on here and hopefully learn something new, but maybe you could teach me more things. So thanks again for everyone for being here. I'm going ahead